September 16th, 1862. And these fields around me here, the 1st and the 12th Corps are resting. And they're getting prepared for the next day's battle. That next day is going to be the Battle of Antietam. Here, Joseph Hooker is going to be at the Poffenberger Farm barn. And he's going to walk in and see his staff. And he's going to tell them, tomorrow we fight the battle that could very well determine the fate of the Republic. Very dramatic in that moment. But he knows what hangs in the balance. A lot of the men that are fighting out here knows exactly what hangs in the balance. Here, this field, this is where it all starts for the Battle of Antietam. We're going to take you out there today. We're going to show you some of the places around here, tell you some of the stories. We're going to start right here at the Poffenberger Farm on the North Woods. So supposedly that barn back there, I'm pretty sure is where Joe Hooker and his staff were. The house itself, the Poffenberger Farm house, was built in kind of two sections. One was built in the 1790s, one portion, and then another portion of that house back there was built in the 1880s. So it didn't exactly look like this during the Battle of Antietam. But this place here wasn't exactly a respite spot for the Union soldiers. They were out here preparing for combat. And the very next day, when they got up, there was a hazy mist all over the place. And this field became very ominous looking. One man talked about it in his diary, about the way this looked. As they were heading into combat out here though, that very famous fight that happens in the West Woods, we're talking about off in this direction over here. Then you have the East Woods, off in this direction right over here. Cornfield, directly behind me, the bloody cornfield. So, some pretty amazing spots out here that we're walking to. And I'm getting up on a high spot here that I like to go to when I come out here to the Poffenberger Farm in Antietam. And I'll show you the view from this point here in just a second. Now, directly behind me right here, you can't imagine it today because the corn's not here, but out through here, going in that direction, you would have seen a huge cornfield. And this is where that infamous Battle of the Cornfield starts to happen. We're in that North Woods area, which goes out towards the Poffenberger Farm over there. Nicodemus Heights is off in this direction over here. We're going to try to get down over there so we can get a good view of that too. The battle's really opened up from Nicodemus Heights. Artillery opens that up over there from the Confederacy as the Union soldiers are coming out and lining up for battle. So this is a pretty strategic and a very important spot here. And if you park at the Poffenberger Farm and take that trail out through the cornfield here, you're not going to be disappointed by what you see. And this beautiful view at this time of year, you really just can't beat it. One of the other great views of this field is from the Pry House, and we're going to get a view from there here later on in this video. So now to give you another really good overview of what we're looking at here, we're looking at the first corps kind of being stretched out here. This is Joe Hooker. And then sort of off in this direction, kind of catty corner like this, is Mansfield with that 12th. Now Mansfield is the officer we did a video about not too long ago here in Antietam, where his command literally lasted 2 days because he was out in this field over in the East Woods, and he ends up dying as a result of combat out here on these fields. But one thing to note, these Pennsylvania monuments that you see here, this is for Albert McGilton's Pennsylvanians. These monuments were placed out here in 1906 at an anniversary of the battle, and they represent the men that were underneath or under Albert McGilton's control out here in Antietam. So a little bit of tidbit of information out there that some people may or may not know, but I'm sure all the history nerds and the Antietam nerds know it very well. This is the East Woods. All of this area here, and even some of this area back through here, was the East Woods. Now there's a Poffenberger Farm that's back down in this direction here that historically was here as well. And Mansfield's monument's right there, because Mansfield ends up falling somewhere out here in this field when he comes onto the field, and as a result he dies. But in this location on September 16th, some of Hood's men actually clash with Seymour's men out here in this field. And a harsh firefight takes place out here, but eventually when the sun goes down, everything just kind of cools off and the two sides go back to where they were. Jackson gets a request from Hood for his men to go behind the lines and get a meal because they haven't had something to eat in quite some time. And of course Jackson grants that request, but he tells him, you know, if I need you, I'm going to call you at a moment's notice and your men must show up. And of course, Hood agrees to this. And then that's where you get the fighting men who are fiery hot the next day because they had just started cooking their food. Well, out here, Lawton ends up wheeling and going over a fence line on the Smoketown Road on the next day, and ends up fighting men coming down through this area here during the Battle of the East Woods. And Seymour's men are somewhere out here placed in these woods. So here we are, East Woods behind me. I'm gonna make my way over here to the Mansfield Monument and kind of get a better look going down there towards the position where Mansfield's men, Seymour and all of them would have been. I just came from a location back there where the East Woods historically are, and this is where Seymour's men would have been, but also Mansfield's out here, and I'm going towards his cannon now. There's an upside down cannon placed in stone out here to identify the location where not only was his command located, but he ends up dying out here on the field. Major General Joseph K.F. Mansfield. And there it is. It's pretty neat to see this. It's been out here for quite some time. When Mansfield comes on the field, he's only been really in command for 2 days. This is his first major command, and his men are ready to fight and willing, and they're going to go across this field here eventually and fight. But Mansfield doesn't make it very far, and he ends up dying as a result of his wounds out here. Again, the Smoketown Road is just around the corner over there. We're going to make our way over there and see if we can find ourselves a nice trail to get out there in the East Woods and continue to cover the opening action of the Battle of Antietam from the East Woods to the cornfield, and eventually make our way over and cover the rest of the fight. And going out here in this field, you can kind of get a little disoriented by the roads, but that road comes from that direction and whips its way around here, and then it ends up on the Smoketown Road, which goes out in the direction of where the cornfield is. And this is the East Woods area, and Mansfield's command and the 12th Corps are actually coming across in this direction, and they're going to make their way over here and push towards the Confederates, who are also coming from this direction over here, eventually wheeling into place. And then the back and forth of the cornfield happens over here just off in the distance. We're going to make our way over there to a couple of locations and add that to the video here too for Antietam. Now, walking out here towards the East Woods, I'm reminded of a story of a musician that was out here, a young man, and he was going across this field, and he describes the heaps of dead and the men who were barely buried and still gurgling in their own blood. And he talks about seeing a man who had been shot and he was still alive, but he couldn't speak. And then he talked about seeing a young man who was maybe 16 years old, and he had been laying down on the ground. He described him as a boy, is what he said, and said the young boy was laying on the ground and had a book with him, and he had wondered if maybe it had been a gift to him for going off to war. And the book had been opened up and it was laid by his head, perhaps remembering his friend in death. Okay, so to add to even more of your confusion, the road behind me here is called Cornfield Avenue. Cornfield Avenue was not here during the American Civil War. And you had the Smoketown Road, which runs right in front over here, going in that direction. And this is where Mansfield men are coming from. They are going to be coming through the East Woods here towards me. And Lawton's men, Alexander Lawton's men, are going to actually be coming through here as well. And they're going to swing and wheel towards that road, the Smoketown Road, and they're going to end up crossing over a fence that's out here on the road and making their way into the woods. Now Lawton ends up bringing 2,500 men to this fight, and when he gets out into these woods fighting on that initial impact, he ends up losing 1,100 men out here, killed or wounded in the action in the East Woods. I'm out on what they call Cornfield Trail out here, which is kind of misleading because it isn't just the cornfield that it covers, and I am in the East Woods, the area known historically as the East Woods, on Cornfield Trail. Eventually, this trail takes you out to the cornfield, and you get a very good view of that cornfield. But I wanted to come out here because this area, it was a wooded area, and the fight that happens out here was so ferocious that it was chopping trees down in the wooded area known as the East Woods. Same thing happened over in the West Woods, but if you can imagine those thousands of Confederate soldiers coming through these woods here and the Union soldiers hitting them and then pushing them back and driving them through these fields in almost a seesaw back and forth kind of deal. It's pretty amazing the combat that took place out here in the East Woods with Seymour and Lawton starting the whole thing off. I'm a big fan of markers, but I'm also a huge fan of these monuments that are out there at these larger fields like Antietam, Gettysburg, the larger preserved fields, that is, where the soldiers continue to come back and tell their story. This is 1st New Jersey Brigade, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th Infantry in Hexamer's Battery, talking about the action that took place here around noon on the 17th of September, saying that they were ordered to this position to form a charge upon the Confederate line just north of the Dunkard Church. But then it was countermanded, and the brigade took position across the road in support of the 6th Corps Artillery to the right of the brigade in the woods north of the road, left in the open field south, where it remained under artillery fire until the morning of the 19th. So it's kind of interesting telling a story. It's a lot of different positions, but looking from here back in this direction, and I hope the wind's not killing my microphone too much. If you kind of look off in that direction over there, there is a Hexamer's monument out there in one of these positions. I want to say it's right here. It could also be somewhere over here. But there's a monument over here to the same guys, the battery that was there and all that stuff. And so it's essentially telling you they were ordered to this position, they were countermanded, and then they were moved across the road into another position before coming under attack and fighting against the Confederates who were coming from over here at the Dunkard Church and all across this field. This is pretty amazing stuff for those first few moments of this fight that happened out here at Antietam. We're going to head back in through the Cornfield Avenue here, the Cornfield Trail, back across the cornfield, and we're going to try to avoid the snakes along the way, and then make our way back up that avenue over here to where a very famous spot was photographed a long time ago of the burial of some soldiers out here in these fields. So I've gotten a bit of a reprieve out here on this field. Though the wind has slowed down, the clouds have thankfully covered the sun and it's no longer 80 degrees out here. So I'm going to kind of point out some positions here now that I'm in the other side where the Georgians were facing the cornfield, and we'll talk a little bit about the advance on the cornfield from here. Now, bear with me. I am no Antietam expert at all. And the book that I am using, in case you want to read it, is A Field Guide to Antietam by Carol Reardon and Tom Vossler. Same authors that I use all the time in Gettysburg. I'm messing around with my camera here, in order to get a good clear picture of the fight that's happening out here. So we'll move down a little further and we will use the book from here. Based on the position that I'm in right now, I'm probably right about where the extended end of the line for Douglas's men are. Lawton gets out here in this field and he starts directing men towards the line. And because of the cannonade that's happening, the bombardment that's coming across this field, Lawton himself ends up getting injured. So now we have Douglas out here directing his men in the field, and these Georgians are getting prepared to fight the men coming across the cornfield on the other side. Now off in the distance here, you can just make out the ridge line. This is where this infamous cornfield is going to be. Off in this direction over here is where the east woods are going to be. In the position that I'm in right now, you have Douglas's men coming out in this direction and then moving towards that direction. Then across the street from here, going across the Hagerstown Pike, is Grigsby and Penn. So they're kind of lined up off in that direction over there. And then back here across the Smoketown Road, you have Walker lined up off here, and Walker will also kind of turn just slightly towards the action in front of him. Directly behind, you have Hayes in this triangle lot. Hayes is sitting back here somewhere, and then Ripley back here off into the right-hand side. And these men are going to go in this direction. They are facing Seymour, who's in the east woods over there, Duryea, who is right here, kind of dead center almost, Hartsuff, which is right behind him. You have Gibbon over here off into the my left, their right. Phelps is right behind him. Then Thompson and Matthews and George Gordon Meade in the North Woods, which is off in the distance, and you cannot, I don't think you can see it from here. Well, actually, that little line of woods right over there, you can see, is part of the North Woods. So we're going to make our way down through this trail and go towards that cornfield. And when I make that turn, walking towards that cornfield, I'm going to turn this camera away from me so that you can kind of see the terrain in this triangle lot here heading towards the cornfield. Now mind you, the triangle lot, if you've never been here before, I call it a triangle lot because of where the roads are. The Dunker Church is there. That dome is one of the monuments for Maryland. And it's there. We have a farm back here, and then this road that runs alongside of it here. The West Woods is off and over here, and the Confederates are lined up in this direction right here. Now, as Ricketts ends up advancing his 3 brigades through that field over there, at one point in time, there's a description from one of the soldiers that talks about laying down in the cornfield. And the Georgians also end up doing something similar to that over here. They know that the Union soldiers are coming through those corn stalks. So they have been ordered to also lie down at one point and then come up and fire into the faces of the soldiers that are coming out of those corn stalks over there. Well, the soldier on the other side tells his part of the story, saying that it rained lead like hail on them as they were laying on the ground. And it did not come down soft either. That's the way you put it. In other words, the bullets that missed their targets went through the corn and landed on the ground after traveling for some time, hitting the backs of the men laying on the ground in the corn stalks out there. It's kind of a crazy story if you think about it. Being surrounded by all this corn, not being able to see ahead of you and behind you and around you. You're down there with your unit laying on the ground, and then all of this lead just kind of falls out of the sky just about the same time. It's very strange. Of course, the Georgians didn't have it easy either. As the Duryea's men were coming out here and firing, they were shooting people left and right. And there was another Georgian soldier who wrote back home telling his family of how 3 men went down almost instantly dying around him, and his brother took a slight wound to the leg. It's pretty crazy stuff. So here's one of the most interesting pictures of the American Civil War. And I'll see if I can't find this in the Library of Congress and put this up here within this clip as well, so you can see it a little bit closer. But this horse, believe it or not, is a dead horse. And it is lied down and expired on the field. But what makes this place so powerful is this is where Colonel Henry B. Strong was located with the 6th Louisiana Infantry when he ends up dying. He is killed out here somewhere on this field, and his body is taken back to the Dunker Church, where a wooden headboard is placed marking his burial. And the Dunker Church is right over there. But in this field, standing in this position here, this is where, according to the sign right in front of us, this is where Gardner took this photograph. It's amazing. So another place sign out here on this battlefield is this sign here about 1st Lieutenant John A. Clark. But more importantly, it is a location of a photograph that Gardner took. Had it not been for this picture here taken by Gardner, which apparently was somewhere out here in this field, we would have never seen this scene. Nobody would have. But you can see the long boards torn down, the grave on the ground here, the Confederate soldier laying near the grave, the Federal soldier buried with those head markers. Now, for 1st Lieutenant John A. Clark, this is a sad story. This man here ends up dying in this field trying to attack the West Woods just directly over there. It did not turn out to be a success for him, and his story goes largely unknown except for this photograph, which we all talk about when we come out here to these fields. But Clark with the 7th Michigan would be taken back home and buried in his hometown thanks to that wooden headboard identifying where he was buried here on this field. Amazingly enough, the contrast was captured in this photograph in the treatment of the bodies on the fields. Most times the soldiers were buried in a hurry, and a lot of times the Confederate soldiers were left where they were, sometimes buried in massive pits, and the Union soldiers sometimes were also buried in massive pits. But for the most part, their soldiers were taken care of, and the enemy soldiers were left on the field. It was kind of the way war was in that situation. And then townspeople sometimes were also left to take care of the dead that were laying on the field. Like many of the men and women that live over here, or lived over here in Sharpsburg, Maryland. They would have to deal with the stench of death for a long time, just like Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. This is one of those spots that's just awe-inspiring, and it just kind of blows my mind to stand here thinking of all those years ago. This is the location where that happened. And just over that way right there is the Hagerstown Pike. That's where the Louisianans were captured in 6 separate photographs of dead men laying all around that location. And they make up for about 6 to 10% of all death-related photographs during the American Civil War. So now that I have this camera turned around, I'm walking in the direction that the Confederate soldiers with Georgia would have been walking up through here. And a lot of the Confederates off in this direction here. One soldier that comes to mind is Cato Pickren. He was a private with the 31st Georgia, and he was out here forward deployed as a picket, if you will. He was ahead of the lines. Well, Pickren never comes back to his lines. They don't know where he's at. He's not listed as a prisoner of war. He was not listed as being in any kind of hospital or field hospital, and he never comes back to Georgia. His mother never finds his body, a marking of his body, or anything about him. So it's assumed he was killed and buried here amongst all the dead in Antietam. Unfortunately for his mother was trying to claim funding from the Confederate government because he was dead, and she was due some sort of pension because of that. Well, she never got it. It's likely that she didn't receive anything because they didn't have any kind of proof or evidence that he was a dead soldier. But one thing's for sure, Cato, or Decatur, which was his first name, never made it back home to Georgia. And Cato is out here somewhere in Antietam. Really all around, regardless of which side these guys are fighting on. The thought of going off to war and fighting for your side, dying in a field somewhere, and never making it back home, it's a real sad situation, and I'm sure no one ever wants to have to deal with that. Now, just as I come up on the ridge line here, you're going to see that turnpike where the Louisianans were kind of stuck behind the fence line over here, fighting back and forth with Union units who were across the street. And as they were jammed up over here, they were being killed on both sides of that fence. Well, Brady comes out here to take photographs, and the famous photograph, or infamous photograph, is taken right along this stretch of line over here on the opposing side of the field. You can kind of make out the sign right there that talks about it. And we'll see if we can't get over there and take a look at that here in just a second as we move on towards the infamous cornfield. Now I can hear some thunder booming in the distance, reminiscent of a cannon going off. That's kind of cool. But being in a wide open field, that's not cool. So we're going to keep our eyes on the weather here and get out of here as soon as we start to see any flashing. So in this cornfield right here behind me, right there, just on that corner there, we're talking about Phelps and Gibbon. Wisconsin men are coming across this road here, and they are adding firepower to the fight that's happening out here. Well, just across the street over there, we're looking at Penn and Grigsby, and we're looking at those Louisianans all lined up over here, coming over the fence line. And this is still early in the morning that all this fighting is taking place out here. A lot of people have this thought in their head that when they come out to this place and it's a hot day and they see corn on the field, that this is what these guys are doing. They're fighting in a bright light of the day and blasting at each other on a hot, smoldering day out here on a cornfield. And it just is not true. These men are fighting each other in the early morning dews of a September day. And they're going to continue to fight for most of the day. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I am standing in front of a very important statue here. I believe this is a New Jersey statue that was dedicated by Theodore Roosevelt. So that's pretty cool to be standing in front of this. Erected by the state of New Jersey in grateful remembrance of her gallant sons who fought on this field September 17th of 1862. Dedicated September 17th of 1903 by Governor Franklin Murphy. Let's see if this says anything on here about the president. I don't see anything on here. But it says First New Jersey right here on the front. That's pretty cool. It's got hexamer on it. Now we're going to head across the street here and take a look at this monument that's facing the Hagerstown Pike, where the actual photos of those dead soldiers were captured. This is Massachusetts, right here behind me. It's pretty cool stuff. And it looks like it's about to start raining. Oh man. So before the rain really starts to kick in out here, I wanted to make sure to get myself across this street. Since we're on day one of this trip, that includes a lot of filming in Gettysburg. But I wanted to be over here on this side of the road because of those photographs. Gary Edelman of the American Battlefield Trust has done a lot of work with historic photographs. And here comes the rain just as we get here. But this is the spot where those photographs were taken of those dead soldiers, and they make up a large portion of the dead on the field of combat here and anywhere else. He mentions that there were only 6 other instances where things like that were happening and pictures were taken of such things. So we're gonna go out here and take a look at this location and the National Park sign that's here. Major Rufus Dawes remembered, "The piles of dead on the Sharpsburg and Hagerstown Turnpike surpassed anything on any other battlefield in my observation. My feeling was that the Antietam Turnpike surpassed all in manifest evidence of slaughter." So Major Rufus Dawes had a lot of memories about this place. He also had a lot of memories about Gettysburg too. But this is the location where Gardner takes those photos. And I'm walking in the field right now next to the turnpike where some of those men actually were laying here dead. No doubt that were in those photographs. Gary Edelman of the American Battlefield Trust talks about this location too with reverence. And he says that there were only a handful of times during the American Civil War that something like this was actually captured not too long after the battle. And this particular location had 6 photographs of those men taken here on these fields. Library of Congress has the negatives for those, but it's a very rare thing that happened during the American Civil War. But these photographs going to the public did something that the public had never seen before. It took war and brought it to them. The Northerners, who were not used to seeing battlefields in their backyards, who were not used to seeing ridgeline and ridgeline of earthworks and dead people and the stench of war and combat all around them, they were now getting to see this firsthand for themselves. And it started turning people against it. It had a visceral reaction, most people did, to this. But also, there were others that were so angry about what they saw that they felt like they needed to finish the business, that this was the time and the place. They needed to continue the fight. So that's what the northern population and the soldiers in the Union Army continued to do. Now, before I'm done going out here to this Miller's Cornfield and kind of capping off this video, if you will, part 1 of Antietam, I wanted to stop out here at the corner of this monument here, the 124th Pennsylvania Infantry Monument, and talk about a young boy who was assigned out here, and he ends up earning the Medal of Honor for his bravery and his actions out here on this field. So out here where the artillery pieces are in this field, 15-year-old Johnny Cook was a bugler. And he could see that the artillery pieces were about to be overrun, and that the officer that was in charge of these artillery pieces needed assistance. So he jumps into action, and he starts aiding the officer with these artillery pieces. Well, because that young brave boy did that, they saw it fit to give him the Medal of Honor. So he was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions here, somewhere in this field at Antietam. And to me, that kind of caps off really a lot of what happened here at the cornfield. You're talking about a back and forth fight where these units continued to press each other all morning long until finally the Union started getting the advantage and pushing the Confederates back a little bit further. And then you have bravery on both sides captured in the death throes of these men with these photographs of their horses and their caissons blasted everywhere, and even the dead soldiers on the roads. This was a terrible fight, bigger than anybody had ever expected to happen here at Antietam. And what's even more, to me, what's even crazier about all of this is we're at a place where the Confederacy is coming to fight the United States, the Union Army, where one of the causes that they're fighting for, one of the causes that everybody talks about, is the opposition to slavery. And here we are in a place, a state, that at the time that the battle was happening, there were enslaved people in that town right over there in Antietam and Sharpsburg. It's pretty ironic, don't you think? But we're going to press on from here, and we're going to continue this series, and we're going to make our way over to the next location. Hopefully the rain lets up here and we can continue making our videos. So I hope you enjoyed this video here at the cornfield. Until we get to part 2, we'll see you in part 2. This is History with Waffles. Oh, and by the way, this battle, it ain't nowhere near done.